Hey guys, welcome back to part 2 of my video on the Western Front. Now we're going to jump to 1916 and look at two major battles that kind of give you the idea of the war. One German offensive, one British offensive, and from there you can kind of extrapolate what most of the fighting in the Western Front was like, unfortunately. So let's go to Verdun. The Battle of Verdun was kind of a unique battle in World War I, in that it was a major German offensive, but unlike the other offensives, the Germans didn't actually plan to take any territory. That wasn't their goal. And so let's look at the words of Erich von Falkenhayn, their commander, and see why not. So Falkenhayn said this. He said, "The string in France has reached a breaking point, a mass breakthrough, which, in any case, is beyond our means, is unnecessary. Within our reach are the objectives for which the retention of which the French General Staff would be compelled to throw in every man they have. And if they do so, the forces of France will bleed to death." Ooh. Ooh. Bleed to death. There's two really important things in this statement from Falkenhayn. Remember, he's the German commander of all their military. One, he openly admits he doesn't have enough men to break the French trench. He says it. We can't break through. Stalemate. Can't do it. But what we can do, and here's the second thing he says, is bleed France dead. And that's their goal. Bleed them to death. Verdun, the Germans don't actually want to break through. They just want to kill the French army. And that is their goal in this battle, is to draw the French in to where they can attack them. And so here we kind of have the line of Verdun. The battle lasts for about a year. You can see a ton of forts along there, as well as major batteries. The German lines are going to advance towards that river and the city of Verdun. They're not going to make it. They are going to take Fort Dumois and Vaux, those big forts there, but they won't manage to get too much further. You can see that top line. They'd take a little bit of ground, but they're not really trying to, because their point is that around Verdun, the Germans actually have the French surrounded on three sides. And the goal really is to get the French to counterattack and then bombard them with artillery from all sides and kill all the French troops and send gas in and things and get the French into a desperate battle to protect Verdun when the Germans really are just trying to kill them. Falkenhayn thinks they can achieve 5 French deaths to every 2 German deaths, and that's the math he uses to try and calculate the battle. So let's get a little deeper. What is it? It's a battle of attrition. And what that means is the purpose is to break down the enemy. And this is what the war really devolves into, is who will run out of men first. No one can achieve victory on the battlefield, but eventually somebody's going to run out of men to throw into this meat grinder of death. And when they do, the war will be over. Falkenhayn thinks he can win it in 1916 by bleeding the French to death at Verdun. So the point was a continuous series of limited advances. The Germans would advance, kill a bunch of French people, bombard them, and then dig in. And then the French would come back and do their retaliation. When the French tried to retaliate, then the German artillery would just mince the French, cut them to pieces. The initial German successes were there. They took a number of forts. We get terrifying images like this, real-life images of a man, I believe, being shot to death. I don't think he's being gassed. As people charge over the ground, you can see how uneven that ground is. That's kind of the reality of Verdun. But the problem that the Germans don't really anticipate is Verdun becomes a death trap for them as well. They think we can kill the French army here, but what they wind up doing is killing basically as much of their army as the French, because when they keep launching those limited strikes, the French artillery keeps shooting them back. And they keep trying to take these positions and advancing. My read on it is that Falkenhayn and his generals lose the point. If the point was to kill the French, they shouldn't have advanced as much as they did, but they kept attacking and attacking, and their repetitive attacks, tons of their own men are going to die too, whereas if they laid back more, they might have succeeded. So what are the casualties? 750,000 men are killed or wounded. About 300,000 of them are killed. The other 450,000, again, are wounded. But remember, in World War I, in a war of attrition, wounding is as good as killing. Occasionally, a wounded man can go back to the front lines after a couple of months, but very often, especially if they lose a limb, if they're blinded, if they take lung damage, you can take them out for the war, because they're going to be crippled for the rest of their life, and cripples can't fight. So hundreds of thousands of young men are crippled in this war, and live, but go home as a cripple and have to live the whole rest of their life that way, because the sides, they don't care if they don't kill you, as long as they knock you out of commission and you can't fight. If they eliminate the soldiers, and that's the point here. So again, 750,000 men, almost 1 million men, 3/4, are going to die over the course of this year in this one battle. The whole region is destroyed. You can see that in the pictures here. These are images of Verdun after the battle. Hey, look, doesn't that town look nice? Hey, there's a couple buildings there that look like they might have survived. But there's just wanton destruction. 70% of the casualties are from artillery. And that was the goal. That was the German plan, right? Bring them into our guns and blow them up. And a huge part of World War I is going to be artillery casualties. For most of the war, the only chance of breaking the stalemate is artillery. You bombard the enemy trench with so many shells that you kill most of their defenders, and you knock the rest of them out, and then you swarm them with infantry. And so artillery is going to be one of the major ways that people actually die. Certainly at Verdun, it's the French being drawn into the German artillery, and then the Germans being drawn into the range of the French artillery. Again, that's the thing that Falkenhayn seems to lose. He doesn't keep his infantry back safe from the French artillery. He keeps throwing them in, and there's no real change in the line of battle, because the stuff the Germans take in the first couple of months of the war, the French take back in the next couple of months of the battle. So by the end of it, nothing changes. 750,000 people die, well, are injured or dead, 300,000 dead. 40 to 60 million artillery rounds have been fired, massively expensive, for nothing. That's the war of attrition. That's why Verdun is going to haunt pretty much anybody from World War I or who fought it. It's the word just invokes terror of constant bombardment, terror of being gassed, the Germans gassing the French, and the French gassing the Germans, and the Germans gassing the French, and just being thrust into this meat grinder of death for nothing. That just levels the whole region with basically no gain. All right. Yay! Happy battle. Maybe the Somme will be better. We'll see. So let's go back to Falkenhayn. And again, another quote, this time not from Falkenhayn. I want to put his picture here, okay? Because this is the guy responsible. All right? First of all, he looks pretty hardcore, which obviously he is to come up with a plan that was basically just kill everybody. But I think people need to be named and shamed. Because again, Verdun results in almost 1 million people dying for nothing. Massive destruction, nothing achieved. It does not break the French army. It breaks the German army as much as it does the French army. It's just death. So let's read about one of these attacks here. This is a quote from, I believe, a French soldier talking about the German attacks on what they called Le Mort Homme. Le Mort Homme means the death hill, or dead man's hill, which is what this place was named in Verdun. The name might give you an idea that it's not going to go well for anybody. So here we go. The Germans attacked in massed formation by big columns of 500 or 600 men, preceded by 2 waves of sharpshooters. We had only our rifles and our machine guns, because the 75s, that's the artillery, could not get to work. Fortunately, the flank batteries succeeded in catching the Boches on the right. The Boches are the Germans. It is absolutely impossible to convey what losses the Germans must suffer in these attacks. Nothing can give an idea of it. Whole ranks are mowed down, and those that follow them suffer the same fate. Under the storm of machine gun, rifle, and 75 fire, the German columns were plowed into furrows of death. Imagine, if you can, what it would be like to rake water. Those gaps filled up again at once. That is enough to show with what disdain of human life the German attacks are planned and carried out. Ooh. Again, this is a Frenchman who's there fighting on the other side, saying Falkenhayn doesn't give a rip about his men. The Germans are just assaulting this death hill, and we're just waiting for them with our machine guns and rifles and artillery, and they're dying and dying in droves. I mean, use that analogy of them being mowed down. We cannot convey, it's impossible, the losses they suffer, plowed into furrows of death. And that's the Germans. They're the ones who are supposed to be doing that to the French, which they did. It went both ways. But it gives you an idea of just the horror of this battle from a first-hand account. and why, again, I have a lot of disdain for Erich von Falkenhayn in coming up with this plan. So let's go to the Somme. The British. Surely they can do better. Surely their plan will be better. People won't die in droves in the British attack. Okay, the Battle of the Somme is one of the bloodiest battles of World War I. There are 1.25 million casualties. So it takes Verdun, and they're like, hey, you thought 750,000 casualties was great. We'll almost double it. Thanks, England. It is a major Allied assault led by the British. In the Battle of the Somme, you have the first use of tanks, and so we have one of these attempts to really break trench warfare. Side note, we'll get back to the tanks. Almost every major breakthrough in World War I is achieved by artillery. Like I mentioned before, by massive bombardment of the trenches, destroying them and devastating them, and then a big charge. Eventually, that gets sophisticated enough that sometimes they break through. The tanks are an attempt that the Allies use, but again, from this early on, they just, especially at the Somme, they just don't have enough. They only have 15 to 30, and most of them break down. I don't know if any of them actually make it to the German trench. All that uneven ground, they get stuck in holes and things. Later on, they're going to get better, and they're going to achieve some success. But really, tanks are not used effectively for at least most of the war, maybe by 1918. But for most of the war, they're a plan, and they are a way to break the trench. If you use tanks right, you can do it, which is why the British try it, but it takes them a lot of trial and error to figure it out. So the Somme is largely viewed as a learning point for the British. That's the optimistic way of describing it. But especially with tanks, they start figuring out how tanks work. They start practicing tactics that are going to be effective later in the war. They're not in the Somme. So these guys dug down to their trench, British soldiers, they don't look very happy. They're certainly not going to be happy if this is from early in the Somme and they're there later. They're in their trench for now. So let's go to the first day. Surely the first day can't be bad. Oh, wait. It can. The first day of the Battle of the Somme was the deadliest day in British military history. Ever. World War II included. The deadliest day, single day, 24 hours, in British military history, in the history of the greatest empire the world has ever known, the greatest colonial power, the First Battle of the Somme. Did I mention that? Yeah, there's almost always like a second or third battle of these places because the trench lines stay in the same spot. There's 3 at Ypres. And here we go. Again, the French described it this way. They said, the British infantry is very brave, but undergoing a costly apprenticeship. And again, that's the optimistic way of looking at this. They learned a lot from the Somme. Sure, 1.2 million people died, but they learned a lot. Come on, World War I generals. Does it take 1.2 million dead people to learn things? It shouldn't. But it did. So, what happens? 57,470 British soldiers are killed, wounded, or missing on the first day of the battle. So, not the battle. Remember, I said 1.2 million, in the whole battle, and I said, 700,000 over like 8 months at Verdun. 1 day. Uno. Satu. 1. The first day. 19,240 of them are killed. Again, more British soldiers die on that day than any other day in all of Britain's military history. 1,000 years of military history. 19,000 troops are killed. 60,000 basically are lost in what is just an epic debacle that will come to describe the First World War for many who are in it, because this is really the first great charge of the British Army. The British have been reinforcing their expeditionary force. They've been calling up reserves. Most of these soldiers are not professional soldiers. They're young men who've signed up with their friends because the British said, hey, if you sign up with your friends, we'll put you all in the same battalion. You can fight with your friends. Awesome! You can die with your friends. That's what really happens. But that makes people sign up because, like, I get to go with my pals, my buddies. The teacher's not going to put us into random groups. I get to pick my group. Woohoo! And so these soldiers have signed up. They've been trained a little bit. They're there. They don't really understand combat. And their commanders say, you get up, you march out there, and you take those German trenches. And they're all excited. And the flower of British youth is there. And they're going off to war. And they get slaughtered. It is butchery. And after the Somme, no one is excited about war anymore. Ever, really, in all of World War I for the British. All of their morale, everything is gone, because this is what the Somme comes to epitomize the war. What they thought was going to be this glorious charge, and they were going to push the Germans back and save France and be home in time to go kiss their girlfriends in the fall or whatever, is just a long deluge of death that begins with a horrific day when hundreds of thousands of British troops, or 100,000 or so British troops, all get up and march out, and 60,000 line up casualties, and the rest run back to their trenches in failure. The failures of the past, another quote, were put down to reasons other than the stout use of the machine gun by the enemy and his scientifically planned defenses. I love that quote. The failures of the past. This is why the British did it. It is 1916. Verdun is happening. In fact, the Somme was partially to pull German troops away from Verdun, and one of the reasons that the Germans fail at Verdun. We've had the battles of the Aisne and the Marne. We've been there. We've charged trenches. We've seen what happens. Everybody dies. That was 1915. I skipped it, but everybody dies. But the British were like, oh, no, that wasn't because marching side by side gloriously at the enemy trench and getting shot by machine guns is a bad strategy. It's because you did it wrong. Ho-ho! Can you sense the stupidity? So that was it. I mean, the British completely misunderstood the reality that you just cannot do this without superior artillery, without speed, without overwhelming firepower, which they didn't have. So they have this long artillery barrage, but they don't have enough guns. It's too spread out. It lasts for days and days and days, and the Germans are just like, okay, chill. And they think we took out the German trenches. We knocked them out. They're gone. Ha-ha. The strategy of creeping barrage. The barrage fires in front of you and your infantry go behind it. The problem is the infantry and the barrage don't move at the same time, and then the barrage goes further because they don't want to hit the infantry, and then the Germans all pop back up in their trenches with machine guns. They go pew, 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 and all of the British soldiers die. It just doesn't work. The Germans are still there. Sorry, I want to go to this picture. This is actually footage, again, of these little dots here are the British soldiers advancing across no man's land. I think it's shot from their trench, so I think they're still marching towards the German trench. You can actually kind of see the barbed wire in the foreground. But, I mean, they're like ants. And if I can see them that far away, the Germans can see them that far away. And maybe they can't shoot them yet, but there's no surprise here. And there's plenty of time for the Germans to get ready. And they're just marching in a line. So what's the result? Hey! The Somme set the picture by which future generations saw the First World War. Brave, helpless soldiers, blundering, obstinate generals. Nothing achieved. And so we go to memes, because I need a meme right now. When you push the enemy line back 150 yards and only lost 750,000 men. The flower. Oh dear. Guys, this isn't war, this is stupidity. This is slaughter. This is murder. Again, this sets the idea of blundering obstinate generals. We can do it. The same old strategy that didn't work before will work this time because we're better, because we're British. Didn't lead to anything. It just led to death. And brave, helpless soldiers. The soldiers doing this were incredibly brave. You had to be. For someone to blow a whistle and you to just get up and march across an open field full of holes into machine gun fire and fire from enemies in a trench, you had to be incredibly brave. But that bravery was wasted by stupidity on the general side. And really, to be fair to the generals, by a lack of technology and a lack of coordination. Once the generals set a plan into motion, they had no way of actually observing what happened. It took way too long to get a message. The only ways they could get messages was, one, carrier pigeon. Oh yeah, that's going to be effective in the middle of an artillery barrage of machine guns. Two, runners. Again, also not effective because they tended to get blown up by artillery while they were running back to the general with the message. And then if they did make it to the general with the message, the general had to write out his message and give it to the runner, and the runner had to run back to the men. And it could take hours for the field commanders to talk to the generals, to talk to the field commanders, to tell them what to do. So if they succeeded, we took the trench for the Germans. What do we do now? 3 hours later. Advance! Well, by 3 hours later, the Germans have repositioned their artillery. They've got retaliation forces in place. And so you advance, and then you get mowed down and dead. They don't have field radio. It doesn't exist yet. It will exist in World War II, and it makes all the difference in the world, because with a field radio, I can in real time communicate back to my artillery, you need to attack them there. General, we need reinforcements. General, can we advance? And the general can command it. But in World War I, as soon as everything starts, it takes sometimes 5-10 hours for messages to get back and forth between the troops in the front and the generals or the artillery, and so they can't redirect the artillery. Everything needs to be planned in advance, and anything they mess up, there's no way to recover. So in the general's defense, there are real technological problems. More important maybe than tanks, well, definitely would have been if they'd had radios. That would have been far more effective at breaking the trenches than the early tanks. So, the experience. Again, what was it like? Let's go to a soldier. Well, we were sitting ducks all the way. Our earlier training, you see, for open warfare, run so far then lie down, then run a bit further. But this was just walking straight into the death trap. Hundreds of us. Just hopeless, said Morris Symes, who was at the Battle of the Somme, one of these soldiers. Just depressing. We can go to the front. What do we see? No change. The green is the furthest German advance. The front line in 1915 is back of the red. That's where they'd kind of withdrawn through at the Aisne. And the purple there is the German advances that'll come later. The Allied advances in red won't come until 1918. The Somme doesn't really move those red and purple lines, that red line where the front really is for most of this campaign. What it does is it destroys the morale of the British Army, and it gives us a picture, a kind of constant picture of hopeless attacks without the proper technology. World War I, they had all of the technology to kill, and they had no technology to save the lives. They had no way of doing it. And so both sides could amass incredible firepower and murder the enemy, but nobody had a way to protect their troops. So this war of attrition is going to break down, and millions of people are going to die. That was 2 million people killed or wounded in just 2 battles in 1916 alone. And this is going to wear down the armies. In 1917, the French will have some mutinies. Other stuff will happen. I'll dig into stuff on the Eastern Front. Everybody runs out of troops by 1918, and that's largely how the war ends. We'll get there later, though. So, but I want to leave that picture in your mind because I want you to understand the futility of these armies and generals for most of the war. This is the Western Front. This is the picture of the Western Front. This is why most of the literature in the 1920s is really depressing, because it was written by people who were at the Somme or Verdun, and they were really depressed about it. It left an image on their minds, an image in literature and poetry, in music, because an entire generation of Europe's youth was scarred by these battles and by these catastrophes. So, if you have any questions, bring them to our Zoom. I hope you guys have a great day.